Free speech is a bedrock principle of American democracy. In fact, the First Amendment states that Congress shall make no law, quote, abridging the freedom of speech. However, the exact meaning of this phrase and what is considered protected free speech has been subject to numerous court cases and public debates.
So, why is this individual right to free speech considered a foundational constitutional principle? And how has it been defined throughout American history? This is the story of freedom of speech.
Democracy is loud. Deliberation and persuasion are central to its proper functioning. It is how citizens and their representatives debate about our values, priorities, and beliefs when formulating law or discussing how we ought to live in society.
To ensure these public conversations are representative of diverse perspectives and opinions, we protect free speech. It creates the opportunity for all voices and opinions to be legally protected and heard.
This free and open dialogue is what helps hold government and their representatives accountable through dissent, criticism, and discussion. This ensures that self-government can operate by ensuring the people have the means to control their government.
Free speech also ensures that a marketplace of ideas can exist, where differing ideas are exchanged and debated to come to a better understanding of truth. It allows individuals to express their creativity, religious opinions, and all other concepts that allow people to be intellectually free. This requires a citizenry committed to valuing the thoughts of others.
However, throughout American history, limitations have been placed on speech, with debates over which ones are considered reasonable and justifiable continuing to this day.
The First Amendment was ratified in 1791, declaring that Congress shall make no law abridging the freedom of speech. This did not mean that the first Congress had a unanimous understanding of what speech was protected, but one principle they did agree on was prior restraint, which meant that the government could not act to prevent something from being printed or said. However, this left open the door for individuals to be punished after their opinions were expressed.
Several famous laws and cases related to this understanding of free speech occurred in the late 18th and 19th centuries. The 1798 Sedition Act, for example, made it a crime to speak in a disloyal way about the government, Congress, or president. It also disallowed citizens to bring them into contempt or disrepute.
Later, in the 1860s, during the Civil War, President Abraham Lincoln had individuals arrested for speaking against the war effort. Famous among these is the case of Representative Clement Vallandigham, who was arrested for a speech he gave that criticized the president, the Emancipation Proclamation, and the draft.
The current meaning and boundaries of the principle of free speech really began to take shape in the 20th century. It was another conflict, this time the First World War, that brought about new laws limiting speech and subsequently several Supreme Court cases concerning the nature of free speech.
In the name of public safety and security, the Espionage Act of 1917 and Sedition Act of 1918 were passed, which outlawed the denunciation of the war and the draft. These acts led to the arrest of more than 2,000 people and 2 landmark Supreme Court cases concerning free speech.
In Schenck v. United States, the court upheld government limits on free speech during wartime because of the clear and present danger doctrine, meaning limitations on speech were acceptable if that speech would bring about, quote, substantive evils that Congress has a right to prevent.
In Abrams v. U.S., the court upheld its reasoning in the Schenck case. However, Justice Oliver Wendell Holmes, who had authored the clear and present danger doctrine, dissented, stating, quote, that the best test of truth is the power of the thought to get itself accepted in the competition of the market. This defense of a marketplace of ideas would become an important principle within the free speech debate.
The debate over free speech continued into the 1920s as the court began to apply the free speech clause to the states via the doctrine of incorporation in the case of Gitlow v. New York. Later, in Stromberg v. California, the court further defined the meaning of free speech when it ruled a state law curtailing individual free speech by preventing the display of a sign, symbol, or emblem of opposition to organized government was unconstitutional.
More landmark cases would follow. Brandenburg v. Ohio protected the speech of a member of the Ku Klux Klan, an infamous white supremacist group. Here, the court stated that the speech can only be limited if it is directed to inciting or producing imminent lawless action and it is likely to incite or produce such action.
In Tinker v. Des Moines, a student's right to symbolic free speech was upheld, and in Texas v. Johnson, the right to burn the American flag as political dissent was ruled to be constitutional.
Then, in the case of RAV v. St. Paul, the court ruled that the hate speech laws were unconstitutional. And although the justices and the majority were split, they broadly agreed that the government cannot take sides on what is determined offensive.
Moving forward, in Reno v. ACLU, the court ruled that a congressional ban on indecent pornographic material was unconstitutional, as it was an overly broad restriction on free speech.
And more recently, the court ruled that political campaigns, unions, and corporations also have free speech protections in the case of Citizens United v. FEC.
These are just some of the many cases heard before the court concerning free speech. Let's face it, it's complicated. But if we tried to summarize our free speech rights, it would be something like this. You have a robust right to free speech, especially regarding individual expression and political beliefs. However, some statements, such as those that are false, obscene, or incite violence, can be subject to limitation. The goal of these Supreme Court cases is to try and establish where some of those boundaries lie.
Free speech guarantees that opinions and viewpoints may be heard, even those with which we disagree. These protections also ensure that we can hold our government officials and public representatives accountable. Through public deliberation and persuasion that is open, diverse, and free, we can express ourselves and work to find the solutions and policies best suited for the nation.
Recent years have seen the rise of social media and new modes of mass communication, and with them, new questions concerning free speech. Although the context has changed, the questions remain the same. What will be the next case to further define the boundaries and importance of free speech? This was the story of the freedom of speech. Thanks so much for watching, you guys.
And be sure to like and subscribe.